Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Yutes Amud Beis. Starting with Daf Yutes Amud Aleph, Halacha Beis, the new Mishnah. After the Mishnah has spoken about where money is found between the shofaros, and it's not known from which of the shofar it was coming from, now the Mishnah discusses other situations where things are not clear where it comes from, and therefore the Gemara will define these things. Says the Mishnah, Mos shenimtzu, if money is found, lifnei schora behema, before those areas where they sell the animals in Yerushalayim, the din is as follows. If it's la'oila means bain, if it's during the year, or bain whether it's during the shalosh regalim. Meiser, the assumption that it comes from meiser money. Now meiser here refers to meiser sheni, and meiser sheni is required to bring one's produce to Yerushalayim and eat in Yerushalayim. If, however, it's too cumbersome, the Torah allows a person to then be poide the holy, the kedusha of the produce onto a matbeya, and then take that matbeya to Yerushalayim, purchase foodstuffs with it, including korban shlomim, which can be eaten, and then that will then satisfy his obligation of his meiser sheni. So here it states if he finds money in a place where they sell behemos in Yerushalayim, the assumption is that when a person brings his meiser sheni money, so for the majority of that money, it's going to go towards the korban shlomim. And he can't stay so long in Yerushalayim. He comes from Orle Regalim and he uses it to purchase korbanos as well as other foods. But afterwards, when he leaves the additional meiser sheni money with his friends and his relatives, who then predominantly buy their shlomim with this money. So therefore, over here, the din is that whether it's during the year, during the shalosh regalim, the money that's found over here, the fnei schare behema, is meiser sheni money. Ubehar habayis. However, if it's found in the har habayis, then the din it's chulin. Here it's chulin. Why is it chulin? Again, whether it's talking about during the shalosh regalim or when it's talking about during the rest of the year, when you find the money by har habayis, then we assume that it is chulin, since the money, the majority of the money, is normally then spent for all types of things, including chulin. So therefore, even if it's during the regalim, we'll assume that it came from somebody who left the money, it fell from that person before the regalim. So since the majority of the money that's spent there in Yerushalayim, in the Har Bayis, throughout the year is chulin, so when he finds it, we assume, we go after the rov, that it's chulin as well. The Mishnah continues, Ubi Yerushalayim, if he finds money in Yerushalayim, here we're talking about the streets of Yerushalayim. Here the chiddush is that since the streets of Yerushalayim are always being cleaned, then the din is as follows, Bishar kol yomos hashana chulin. During the rest of the year, then we say it's chulin, because it has been cleaned. And therefore we find the money during the rest of the year, it must be then chulin money. However, b'shas ha-regel, ha-kol meiser, if it's during the regel, so then since it was cleaned, the streets were cleaned, it can't be therefore money from the rest of the year, it must be money that was brought for the shalosh regalim. And therefore it's meiser, since the majority of the money that is going to then use over there in Yerushalayim is going to be buying the korban shlomim, therefore it's meiser money. The Mishnah continues, if one finds basar, meat, in the azara, the din is as follows, Eivarim oilos. If he found Eivarim, that means pieces of meat that are by their limbs, so then we assume that it's for the korban oila, because since the korban oila is only split, is only broken into the nesachim of the Eivarim, and then is put on the mizbeach, therefore the assumption is that that meat which was found is a korban oila in the azara. If you found, however, meat in the azara, and since meat that is cut into smaller pieces is in order to then be eaten by the kohanim, that meat is not only referring to chatos, but also ashamos, and therefore that meat is one of those korbanos. Since chatos and ashamos are only eaten in the azara, the assumption this is the type of korban that he found. Ubi Yushalayim, if he finds in Yerushalayim where you can eat the korban shlamim, as well as other animals, other korbanos, then zivchei shlamim, since the majority of those korbanos, even though you can eat also, for example, korban korban toida rather, or also other animals, meiser, bechoros are eaten all in Yerushalayim, but since the majority of those korbanos are shlamim, therefore the meat that's found there is assumed to be a korban shlamim. However, the Mishnah goes on to say, these meats that were found, either those that were in a vorim, that were found in the azar that we said are korban oila, or the meats of the chatos or the ashamim that are found in the azara, or even those korban shlamim that's found in Yerushalayim, they cannot be brought as a korban or to be eaten because they are considered to be tameh, and therefore they have to be brought to the Beis HaSreifa. So it says over here, zev zeh tu ubar tzura, so you have to leave it overnight till it becomes noisar. Then it will be brought to the Beis HaSreifa to be burnt. Nimsa b'gvulin, the Mishnah continues, if he found the meat in gvulin, that means in cities of Eretz Yisrael outside of Yerushalayim, evarim neveilois v'chatichois mutaros. If he found evarim, so the assumption is that they're still only cut in pieces of evarim by the limbs themselves, and it was used to throw to the dogs because it's neveilois. However, if they're cut in small pieces, then it's for the human consumption, and it's mutaros. Here we're talking about, again, cities in Eretz Yisrael, outside Yerushalayim, and of course the majority of the butchers are Shomer Torah mitzvahs, are Yisraelim. On top of Yutes Amud Beis, the Mishnah concludes, Ubeshas haregel shahabosar meruba af evarim mutaros. The Mishnah says that during the regel, where the basar is a lot of basar, even when you find basar that's evarim in these cities, then they are mutaros. We assume they are not going to be levelos, but rather they are mutaros. The Gemara says right away with the following question: how can we assume that meat was found in the Har HaBayis is chulin? Hare, we have the Gizbar who takes the money of the Meiser Sheni money or other monies, and he goes ahead and he takes that money, let's say it's Meiser Sheni money, and he goes ahead and he buys a animal. So that money that was found in the Har HaBayis, why don't we assume that it's kodesh? Ask the Gemara, Lo tzurcha, the Lo Bahar Bayis kodesh. Meaning to say, it shouldn't have said only that the money that's found in Har HaBayis is kodesh and not chulin, as the Mishnah ruled. Answers the Gemara, Rabbi Bo, Rabbi Chia b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, Chazaka she'en hakoyen moitzi min halishko mois ad shehu mechalon al habehema. We have a chazaka that the kohen is first mechalel the money that has kedusha onto the behema, and only then leaves the lishka with that money. Meaning to say that money now becomes chulin. So if it was indeed lost, it was dropped and found, it must be chulin money, and therefore again the ruling of the Mishnah is if money is found in the Har HaBayis, then it is assumed to be chulin. The Gemara quotes the Mishnah as saying, "Basar shenimtza." If you find basar, we said it depends on where you found it. If you found it in the Azara, or if you found it in Yerushalayim, also depends on how the meat was found. If it was evarim or if it was chatichos. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Lozar b'shem Rav Shaya, Hisiya das ton ibur tzura. Rav Shaya says that from the hesech hadas, that means to say that the fact that this meat was found, let's say in the Azar or in Yerushalayim, then this meat that we're talking about had hesech hadas, and therefore is lacking shmira, whereby we're assuming that it is tamei, and therefore, Rabbi Shaya rules that it has to be then left overnight to ultimately be burned. The term, by the way, uibor tzura, means that there's a change in its form. When you leave it overnight, the form of then leaving it as noisar, where then it can be burnt. Omar Vashaya, Masnisin Amar Kain. Indeed, that's what the Mishnah says. If you found such meat, then that meat has to then be left overnight to then be burnt the next day after it's noisar. So now the Gemara is saying over here that indeed this opinion is saying, since the lack of the shmira of this meat, the hainu, the hesech hadas, we then assume that this meat is tamei and therefore has to be burned. Omar of Yosi says v'yeyus, and this is very good. This makes a lot of sense. Before we go to this answer, in other words, the Gemara now is saying, once we then say that it is tamei, and therefore has to be left overnight to be burnt, or at least we're assuming that it's tamei, and therefore have to be left overnight to be nice and to be burnt. So now the Gemara really has an implicit question. Once we say that it's assuming to be tamei, why is it assumed to be tamei? If we have a klal, which we do, that the principle says that when you have meat found in the Rishus Harabim, the suffix status makes it so that it is indeed tahor. So then over here, the Beis Hamikdash and the Azara have a din of Rishus Harabim. So since you found this meat in the Azara or in Yerushalayim, which has a din of Rishus Harabim, why assume that it is tamei? And therefore you have to leave it over to be burned? That's the Gemara's question on Rav Ashaya. To which the Gemara now answers, on Rabbi Yosi, V'yos, it's very well, it's very good what he had said, because la'ochloi ein at yachol, shema niskalkot tzurosa. You cannot eat it because maybe it has niskalkot tzurosa. Maybe there was noisar. You don't know when you found it if it's over the designated time. So you cannot eat it. So what should you do instead? So therefore we have to then leave it even longer to be certain that it's noisar and then burn it. Lefun kein tzorich meimar tu'ubar tzurosoi v'yetze lebeis hasreifa. The Mishnah continues, and it's quoted over here saying, Nimsa bigvulin, if you found the meat in cities of Eretz Yisrael outside of Yerushalayim. So we made a distinction in the Mishnah. If you found Eivarim, then you assume that it's Nevela. If you found, however, Chatichos, small pieces, then you can say that it's Chulin, again, assumption that we're talking about Rov was Yisraelim. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Krispa b'shem Rabbi Yosi b'Rabbi Chanina. Eivarim Nevelois loikin aleim mishum nevelo. The Eivarim that we found outside, again, these Eivarim in these cities of Eretz Yisrael were found, they are considered to be nevelos, and therefore he'll get malchus if he eats it. In other words, not just a concern that it's nevelos, but it's bevadai nevelos, to the point where a person's over and iser deraisa, alav by eating it. If he eats it, he gets malchus. The Gemara says, Masisa Amar Kain. Indeed, the Mishnah says like this, Evare nevelos. The Mishnah says, Evare nevelos v'chatichos mutaros. It says two things. The Evare are nevelos and the chatichos are mutaros. Says the Gemara, chatichos mutaros loy mamish. Certainly, that it says the chatichos are mutaros, it means that certainly that they are vadai mutar. So if that's the case, then let's be consistent with the ratio of the Mishnah. Nevelos, when it says nevelos are Evar nevelos, then what's the din? With the Gavase Evar nevelos, loikin aleim Mishnah nevela. Then we must be consistent and correspondingly say then that the nevelos that's mentioned in Mishnah is something that if a person were to eat will be chayiv malchus. Rabbi Krispa b'shem Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina teaches another din. Im hayu machroizois mutaros. If those even Evarim that are found in the Arei Eretz Yisrael, outside what's called the Gvulim of Eretz Yisrael, and they're found on strings, then we assume that these Evarim are not Nevelos, because a person would not put these Evarim on strings. If they are Nevelos, they would just be separate and they would throw them to the dogs. The fact that he's putting on strings means that it's meant to be eaten for human consumption, and therefore they're kosher. The Gemara now brings a related type of din. Teisha choniois mukarois moichrois basar nevela va'achas moicheres basar shchuta. Here it states there are 9 stores that sell meat that is nevela, and 1 store in the city that sells meat that is shchuta. Nischal fuloi, and it got mixed up. He wasn't sure which one he bought from, which was the meat that he had in front of him. So Choishesh, we're concerned, because after all, over here, it's very likely that the meat that is in front of him, misfeika, is osir. So the din is that's osir. However, because it's only a safek, if you were to eat it, ein loikin alov, you wouldn't get malchus. That would be the din over here. Why? Because we have a klal, kol kavua, kemechza al mechza domi. And since over here, these are 9 stores that sell treifos, and 1 store that sells shchuta, and that's kavua. So we're going to say over here, the din is that misafek, we assume that it is a problem, but nonetheless, if you were to eat it, it would not be chayiv malchus, because it's not certain. As we say, the din is that, again, it's kemechza al mechza domi. The Lesin says holchin acharov, but in our scenario that we had just spoken about before, where you have called meruba the parish called meruba, called the parish meruba parush, then the din is that since there's a majority of stores that are selling nevelos, we assume that this meat that is in front of him is nevela. If he eats it, he's going to be chayiv malchus. Similarly, taishek chanios moichrois basar shchuta va'achas moicheres basar nevela. In the opposite scenario, we have 9 stores selling basar shchuta. 1 store of the 10 is selling basar nevela. So nischal fuloi, he's not sure the meat that is in front of him, which store did it come from? So we say choishesh again, kol kavua kemechza al mechza dami, and we say that it's osir for him to eat, and misafek. However, the Lesin says holchin acharov. Again, over here we say called the parish meruah parush, and since the roiv are stores that sell basar shchuta, then we say it's mutter. Rabbi Yochanan said the following din: Hanimtza biyad nochri kenimtza beplatya. One who finds basar in the hands of a nochri, you can assume you found it in the rishus harabim. Says the Gemara, and therefore, if you found the rishus harabim, if roiv of the butchers are Yisrael, then you can assume that this meat is mutter. Rabbi Loza b'rei Rabbi Chagai have a mismach l'Rebbi Mona. Rabbi Loza b'Rabbi Chagai, he was walking and supporting Rabbi Mona. Chama lechad armoi mikato min susei umapik leboro. He saw a goy that was cutting from a horse a limb, and he brought it outside to the street. Omar lei. So he said to him, Hada Omar Rabbi Yochanan, he said to Rabbi Mana, is this what Rabbi Yochanan said when you see that a Nachri has a basar in his hands, you can assume that's the Rishus HaRabbi, and therefore if the majority of butchers are Yisraelim, then it's going to be kosher meat? Hanimse biyad Nachri, Hanimse beplatya? Is that indeed what Rabbi Yochanan said? And therefore over here the assumption would be that this is kosher meat. Here we see with our own eyes that this Nachri is taking this meat from his sus. Omar Le, Rabbi Mana expanded, Kain Omar Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi. Indeed, Rabbi, my master, Rabbi Yosi said in the Rabbi Yochanan, V'hein sharo oisoi yoitze mimekulin shel Yisrael. But that din that he saw was talking about when a Gentile takes a piece of meat from a Yisrael, from one of the Jewish stores. So then we assume that it's the meat that is from the majority of those chaniyos in the city. But over here, when you saw with your own eyes that he took the aver from the sus, certainly you cannot say that Rabbi Yochanan would agree over here that's like taking from one of the majority of the stores that sell meat in this city, and therefore certainly in this scenario it's going to be non-kosher meat or be nevela.